Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. Good morning to my good friend and co-host, John Clark. John, what's going on?
How's it going, Josh? Huguenot.
Huguenot. That's actually a real word.
Well,
that's like a real group of people, I think.
Yeah, it was. Was that the Huguenot? Was that Jason and the Huguenots, or I thought it was the Argonauts? From I don't know. I'm saying this, but do you know what I'm talking about? I think it's Josh.
I don't know about Jason and the Huguenots, but I'm pretty sure the Huguenots are like a real historical thing.
Should have come more prepared. I just it sounded like a thing, and now it is a thing. So it's not. I'm not just playing off of any words, but nevertheless, I'm still trying here. We're probably going to drop this.
It's okay. I'll give that a 6. I'll give that a 6.
I'm doing great. No, not much to update on. Just kind of enjoying summer. We got 1 week left. I am interested in talking to you about, and I don't know if this is an on-air thing, but sent you this article last night about University of Michigan, my least favorite university, fine university. Man. So people are listening. Go into a no grading policy for first-year students, just pass or fail for freshmen, because I guess the emotional turmoil is too difficult for them. As people who on a podcast about leadership always talk about the importance of not being a hero to someone. We talked about this with psychological safety. We talked about this, I think, about servant leadership. All of this can't be about saving people. It just becomes people have a right to have to endure challenge. So I thought it was really interesting. I'm always looking at opportunities to like Michigan a little bit less. So curious to get your thoughts on that. So.
Yeah, it strikes me as just like a really blaring example of incredibly high emotional accommodation, incredibly high reactivity to important questions. Student mental health, of course, we spent a lot of time on that. But the way it seems to be rolling out just strikes me as just so, oh my gosh, I think you can see the train crashing already.
Well, and I know other universities do this. I guess my brother-in-law has another brother-in-law who went to John Hopkins, and they did a similar thing. And so he thought he was doing fine, but then the second semester when they started doing grades, it was a rude awakening when he realized these aren't very good grades. I was just passing. I know Brown does something I think they've been doing for a long time, where any class you can basically pick it as pass, fail, or you can get an A, B, C grade. And I don't really know much about that. I'm sure that you have to be you have to think critically about what do I want to be pass fail versus what's important to get a grade for. But I guess to me, and I know MIT does something similar, I guess to me, to your point about, we have to worry about folks' mental health, I agree, but I actually think this perpetuates the problem more because these conditions where it is, the assumption is I shouldn't have to endure any challenge, right? And therefore, people are going to overly accommodate that. I read I think we should link the article. I think
we'll put it in there. Sure.
I can maybe give it as a gift article from the Times. But in the article, I love this line. It says, Jonathan Alpert, a psychotherapist and author, agreed that getting a bad grade can feel awful and make students anxious. And then he says, but feeling bad isn't the same thing as being unwell, he said. I worry that therapists and institutions have blurred that distinction. I love that. Feeling bad is not the same as being unwell, but I think we have created a world where people actually think I shouldn't feel bad. And if I do, I have anxiety and I should avoid anxiety. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this. It comes from being over-medicated. We have done everything we can to think nobody should deal with complexity. And it actually, I think, just creates a lot more challenges. I don't know.
I agree.
I think it's a steep drop off a cliff. I think it fits in with a lot of what we talk about, and I think Michigan, you failed your people. That's all I'm going to say, Michigan.
Yeah, I think it does, and I think the nuance I think that I would add is just that it's one thing to say that we don't believe that grades are the best representations of learning. Fine, then apply that across the entire university for all 4, 6, 10 years of students. But to say that your first few months in school are going to be pretty hard on you. We don't want you to feel too bad about it. We're just going to say for the first 6 months, you're not accountable to the kind of learning that you're supposed to be doing. I'm sure maybe some parameters around that.
Yeah.
That strikes me as just a very short-sighted approach to it. And I think that's enough said for this episode, but we'll I
guess I would think it would be different if it said, hey, our first semester for freshmen is this basic like protocol of courses. That's kind of a first half a year. And because of that, we make these pass fail because every kind of student, I don't know, something like that would even be different than it just seems everything's pass fail. I don't know enough about it. I just thought it was an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Food for debate. And maybe it'll get us some listeners because this will come across Michigan fans' feed and they'll hear me talking shit about their institution. So
yeah,
they're also going to be bad. They're going to be mediocre at best at football this year. Anyway, we can move on.
I mean, we really probably should have a sports podcast, but
we could be good at that. I think we wouldn't be bad, but we don't have enough access. All right. Michigan fans, we'd love you to subscribe, share this episode, be part of the conversation. Download our podcast wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, most other places. We're on YouTube. If you just want to see our shining, brilliant faces, give us some reviews, leave some comments, share it with friends. We'd love to keep this moving and get people using it. So
if we get 50 Michigan fans to sign up this next month and all 50 of them put a note, a review that says, hey, we have the courage to embrace people challenging us. We're from Michigan. We love this podcast. John and I will wear blue and gold and sing the fight song. Can you get behind that? I think that's a pretty ambitious goal. But
I won't wear maize and blue. I'll wear gold and blue and sing
gold and blue. But we'll sing the fight song. I'll play the fight song on my trumpet if we get 50 Michigan fans to sign up for this podcast.
Hail to the victors. We'll play that one.
Da, 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 da.
You can do a solo podcast that time. But we can do something. We can figure it out.
I grew up in the Midwest. I actually really, when I was a kid, I didn't know better, but I actually kind of like that fight song. I know that's sacrilege for a Notre Dame fan. But
no, you're allowed to like it. You just got to accept that it's not.
You won't be on the episode when we play it.
Yeah, no. But with that said, really excited about today's topic. I'm sure we can actually find ways that banter there fits in with us. But today we want to talk about a topic we talked about before, but I think we want to take a different spin on it or just reintroduce it with some new thoughts. And this one's on personal development, right? And the notion, we talk a lot about development on here. And, I think I'm going to jump down to some of these things we often hear, right, Josh? Or maybe I'll let you get into that. But here, I'll get in. I would like you to get into those and we can riff on that a bit. We want to get to the point of like personal development we talk a lot about like develop yourself. I think often that feels the framing there is more about on the ground training. I think it's how people interpret that. Well, by doing things and by experiencing things and maybe even going through some failures without being over supported, you can learn how to do things and you get better. I think Josh and I for today have a very different spin on it that sure that can happen. But again, that's kind of late. To me, sometimes that's managers with lazy development for their people. It's just like, well, if you just do the thing, you'll figure it out and you'll learn. What we're talking about here is more of the interpersonal work of, I know I have this challenge, and then it ends there. And we want to talk about, well, what does it mean to actually get into the behavior side of what I'm actually doing as a result of this personality I have or this tendency I have? What is actually showing up that is visible to me and others? Because that's the thing that can change. In my work, I talk a lot with people about personality is hard to change. It's really hard. It takes a lot of time. Nor do we want to tell people they have to change their personality. Motives are hard to change because we're not even aware of our motives. They're deep inside of us. They're from the nature nurture debate. They're embedded in our subconscious in many ways. But all of those at some point become visible through a behavior. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those behaviors become habits, and you can see them when they're happening, and then you can ask, "Why am I doing that?" And then you can change it. So we want to get into that today. So Josh, talk to us a little bit about, let's take a step back from there though. What are the things we often hear about personal development and how does that fit in with this idea that we want to challenge people to move into behavior? So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the intro. And I think to add a little bit of oomph here is, I just want to call attention to the fact that I have not met any leader who doesn't say to some effect, oh, I think everyone can grow, or yeah, you got to know yourself, or I'm a big believer in personal development. And in the same breath saying that, not really doing a whole lot about it, not, investing in their own development, whether that be through something external, through coaching, whether it be through diligent follow-up on like, what are my goals and how am I changing my actions? I guess what I'm saying is that most of you probably listening to this at least have named the fact that you think that you have some degree to grow and change as a leader. I think, though, there's a lot of people who say that. In fact, I don't know many leaders who don't say that, but there's very few leaders who actually follow through and do it.
Sure.
And I think that the reason for it could be one of a couple of things. I think one of which could be it's a will gap. I know what I'm supposed to say, but no, I don't have the time to really invest in that. Or it becomes a distraction piece of like, well, the thing I really need to change is this interior part of my own tendencies that I'm not aware of them, and I'm not really willing to put the mirror up. So instead, I'll put something on the surface. I'm a good example. Like I'm preaching a little bit to my own choir here. Is that I can get very wrapped up in talking about an idea as opposed to my own experience. And that idea is a really great way to distract away from the real work that needs to happen, which is how I'm actually experiencing this situation or others are experiencing me.
Big part of it, how others are experiencing it. What's the behavior I'm showcasing that is then impacting myself?
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
That's right. And so I think that what I'm getting at here is it's a little bit of a call up for anyone who's listening to this, is that you might be listening to this podcast week in, week out and nodding along saying, yeah, these guys know what they're talking about. This is interesting stuff. I think the biggest question, though, is what's changing? What are you doing to change yourself? What are you doing to change the ways that you behave? What are you doing to be more aware of the impact you have on others? And how are you demonstrating that curiosity to give you enough momentum to change the way that your leadership tendencies might be getting in the way? And I think that is the question that every leader has to both ask and do something about. And the difference is, kind of tying to our previous episode, is do you look at leadership development, so such as a podcast, reading a good article, talking to your friend about it, do you look at that as a way of being helped? Or so passive, right? We talked about helping versus useful. Are you just feeling like leadership development could be helpful? Or are you looking at it as more about how will I lean in to make this development useful? One of those is passive. One of those is active. And what we want to challenge you on the show today is to think about what active work will you do to change the way that you are leading.
I'm interested in something that spurred for me in what you said earlier. And I want to pause for a minute. I'm actually going to talk about, before we get into how do you personally develop yourself, I'd want us to get in the head or in the seat of the person managing others, actually. And I know we said, hey, we're just going to focus on personal development. I think my question is, I could see someone being like, yeah, that's it. My people just need to personally develop themselves. They need to be thinking about these things and doing it. And that's not wrong, but it also can tend itself towards underfunctioning, taking a back seat, and just assuming like people can develop themselves, right? So let's get in that head. What does it mean? What do you do as a leader to develop? Maybe this is a bigger conversation, but maybe we just take a minute here. What do you think about how do we, as managers of others, create the conditions or give the message or set the tone or whatever to build the skill of others to personally develop themselves? So I know it feels like paradoxical maybe, or maybe even oxymoronic, but how do I develop others to personally develop themselves? Or how do I set the stage for my team to think this way?
It's a really good question. Yeah.
From this podcast episode, that would be one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. I think that there's a few answers that come to mind kind of briefly. One is this idea that I think there's a lot of truth to it, is that it's hard for people who you're supporting to exceed the degree of maturity that you have if you don't have it yourself, right? So to some extent, the care provider, the leader, the therapist, your clients are not likely to, at least within the realm of working with you, going to exceed your level of maturity if they don't already have it, if you don't have it yourself. And so
some of this is just my example of how I'm like basically telegraphing the things I'm trying to work on.
Sure.
And in the case of what's going to be our conversation here, this is a behavior I'm aware of that I do, team. Right. This is how I'm shifting it. I want you to hold me accountable. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's two, it's kind of two pieces. It's the subliminal model. It's like the subconscious modeling that you're doing just by being a leader who's exemplifying certain traits and attributes that are exemplary or at least motivating for others to kind of achieve. I think there's also the explicit level of if you haven't done the work on yourself, it just comes through as insufficient if you're trying to get others to do that work on themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that. I think so. Number one, do that first. I do think I would, as we talk through this, if I'm managing others and you want to introduce this to them, this is about pattern recognition and behavior change. So, think about the type of feedback you're giving or the growth goals that people have set. Do they stop at just a pretty high level of I'm conflict averse and I need to work on that? Or does it say, hey, when conflict occurs, my tendency is to do this, which leads to this problem. And this is how I want to change the thing that I'm doing. Like a small tweak, like make it as visible, as visceral, as clear as possible. It's not just like this vague, I don't like conflict. It's when conflict occurs, my heart rate goes up, I end the conversation and I walk away. Okay, great. You know that. Now what do we want? Well, I want to stay engaged. And then you go from there. Like,
I mean, I think this would be, let's maybe look at this. John and I have a tool we want to share with our listeners today.
Yeah. And while Josh is calling that up,
to be practical, but before that, go ahead.
No, just going to name this. Like, the big thing here today is really about, and I'm going to get into this a bit with naming types of behaviors, but Josh is going to share this tool. But I want our audience to get in the mind about naming behaviors in context of people's lives and what they're doing, where we see behaviors actually happening that are problematic, and then shifting or tweaking the behavior. Okay. So That's it. So I just want people to get in that mindset, because it's getting more granular than I think sometimes like development plans or growth goals get to.
That's right.
So
and that's the goal. And I think that right before I'll share this, I think the other kind of note here, there's a couple reasons that this work doesn't happen. One of those is the will to not do it. It's I'm comfortable saying that I want to do it, but I don't really have the will to invest in it. It sounds like the thing I should say to look like I'm a self-aware leader is, oh yeah, development. Everyone does development. It's great. I'm really a big believer in growth. Right? That could be a will gap, or you maybe just outright don't care. And if that's the case, you're not listening to this podcast. My suspicion is that none of our listeners lack the will, or at least lack the will on a deep level of like, oh, I don't believe in development, because literally that's what this podcast is about. But I do think that one of the gaps that exists for a lot of people in leaders is that there's a skill gap. And I think what John and I want to introduce today is a little bit more a tool and some language to equip you with some skillfulness to think about changes to behaviors. Because you might say, yeah, I'm all about leadership change. I'm all about it, but the tools that I have available to me are insufficient. I don't have the right people around me that know more or know a little bit of a different way of approaching this. And so we hope to be equipping you with some skills today. And I think the other paradigm shift is there's so much familiarity in our lives as people, not just as leaders, right? The power of the familiarity. And this example came up in a coaching call the other day when basically asked, do you brush your teeth? Yeah, I think everyone I know does.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question is, well, where do you start? Where do you start? And as you start, and for our listeners, kind of picture, where do you start? For me, I think it's 100% of the time the bottom left of my mouth. That's where I will start. My toothbrush goes there.
Probably,
it's this muscle memory. It's this routine. And as leaders, there's so much of our daily work that is routinized. It's something that we expect. It's something that we're very comfortable with. And I think that the familiarity is what can get in the way of true change to behaviors. And so as John and I talk through the second half today, I want you to think a little bit about, is this an unfamiliar way of looking at my leadership? And what can I do to introduce more unfamiliarity into my development? Because if all you're introducing is more familiarity, it's not likely to shift the needle very far. So that's kind of the framing. John, you ready to kind of
let's get into the KYLY tool?
Know yourself to lead yourself is that abbreviation. And so for our verbal listeners,
KYLY, the KYLY approach. No,
the KYLY, yeah, I don't know. If you want to watch this on YouTube, please, check it out there. If you want to see the visual that we're flashing up here on the screen, and we'll put this in the show notes as well, and we'll give you the ability to access this. But I'm going to walk through this with a personal example. So for audio listeners, what this is an infinity loop. The left side of it says know yourself. The right side of it says lead yourself. And in the center bottom of it starts with a tendency. A tendency, motive might be another way to think of it. Those are the things you really don't have a whole lot to, like, that's just what happens. It's kind of just, it's wired into you. It's the way that you kind of react to a situation. And that's not where the change happens. But a personal tendency of mine is that I sometimes have a tendency to get defensive when somebody challenges my work. It feels personal, and it makes me feel like others see me as incompetent. And gosh, when that happens, it just kind of gets me going. And the pattern, kind of the when and the where this is happening, it's maybe when I'm sharing something.
So just to pause there, just because people are listening, Josh went from tendency. So he named a tendency, which is that defensiveness. Now, number 2, just to be super clear, is acknowledging what's the pattern that occurs there. So I have this tendency. It feels like to me, talk to me about pattern, Josh, but this seems like, okay, so how does this actually show up? Is that correct?
Yeah, the pattern is almost the layer before the action. It's like when and where. Like what are the antecedent behaviors that kind of spark this tendency on some level? And the pattern is usually if I'm sharing something that I've put a lot of time and energy into, and I receive critique by a person who I don't know if they really have my back.
Okay, so when or where is what patterns are. When and where does this
when
happen?
And where, right? The tendency is the general category of being defensive. The when and where is often in these moments when I'm conveying new information or laying something out to others that I've invested in.
So now 3 is the actions, the actual behavior that becomes visible.
Right.
When and where this happens. So get into that one.
So that's right. So now my action, this is my less mature functioning. This is my unhealthy version. This is the part I have all of the say in, is my action. The tendency is kind of baked in. The pattern is like the things I have to do to share information with people, but this is where I have some say.
Yeah, and I will say about tendency, and this is where I think people stop a lot of times, is they say, I have this tendency. You have to go into this next step of like, well, where does this become most problematic? When does it just what you did, right?
Yeah.
But I would say tendency is kind of maybe more in the bucket of personality. It's maybe more in the bucket of motive, right? It's great if you can recognize it. But the tendency itself may not be something that you can ever just get over and change it.
That's right.
That might always be your tendency because of who you are. So I just want to name, that's kind of more of that. What Josh is doing is he's shifting it to how does this become visible? What are my actual actions related to it? Because that's where change can happen. So thank you. Just continue.
Yeah. So my visible actions in this situation is that I start to get reactive and a little firm, maybe a little tense. I have a tendency to want to over-explain something. And I might even go as far as asking like a contaminated question, which we've talked about, which would be like, wait, so you really think this is a bad idea? Or like, what about this feels dumb to you? As opposed to like, can you tell me what you're thinking as you heard what I said? Right. One of those is a real question. One of those is kind of me passively or passive aggressively acting. Right. So that can be one of my tendencies. And the consequence of that is that people start to be like, oh, well, I thought I was asking a good question to Josh, but his defensiveness just makes me just kind of want to move on. Like, can we just move on? Can we just, like, you're annoying me right now. Let's just stay at the surface.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a new topic. Or sometimes the other thing that they do is they just defer and they say, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's fine.
That's a big one. So, you get your voice, your firmness, your kind of annoyance, those contaminated questions actually gets them to kind of do what you want, which is defer, which actually doesn't get you to the type of conflict and team collaboration that you want.
Right, which is the last part, which is, well, so the consequence is that people stay at the surface. And then the reality is that people over time start to just give me a partial truth, or they don't ask me a question knowing that it's probably just not worth the hassle of having me disagree with them. And they kind of hide parts of their true vulnerability and their true self with me. And that limits the depth of relationship I'm able to have with people and keeps important issues from being addressed. Right. So that's the reality that happens because of my tendency to be defensive sometimes. So what I wanted to introduce then is, okay, so what? The tendency is not going away. The pattern, the need to share information to people, that's not going to change my role.
Okay,
But
so
what
now
I
Josh he's done another one, I'm guessing, right? This is like
yes,
more of a healthy reaction. So
this
he
is the
he
healthy version for
same
yeah. Thanks, John.
tendency,
Yeah,
same tendency, same pattern.
right,
Now Josh is going to shift the action. So great.
right.
This is like a second form. So
So
go
this
for it.
is where my choice comes in. This is where I've paused. This is where I've thought, and this is where I've chosen to work on something different. And so internally, I'm starting to see this tendency arise. I recognize I'm being defensive, but what my first response has been over time is to say, you know what? Thank you. That was a real risk for you to share that question with me, or that was. I understand how hard that might have been to bring up this question, and I appreciate it. I really do. May
Can I
I
pause you
ask
there?
you a few questions after that to get some clarity? But this is really a really good question. So that's my action, is to slow down, to show gratitude, and then to start asking uncontaminated questions that are not trying to prove the other person wrong, but listening to gain more insight as to where this other person's coming from.
So I want to pause there and ask you a couple
Great.
questions. For
Yeah.
you chose, okay, instead of the contaminated question or the firm voice, I am one to introduce gratitude immediately. Why did you choose? Why gratitude? Why that? Hey, thank you for that. What does that? What do you know that does for you psychologically, or kind
Hmm.
of changes for you? Why was that an important, very specific thing that you do in terms of introducing the gratitude?
Yeah, I think it's because I actually, if I were to really think about this, is I do want to get better. I do want people to bring their concerns to me. And I recognize that it is a real risk for somebody to do that. And it's especially a risk if the pattern in the past has been for me to kind of shut that down. And so I am thankful somebody's willing to take that risk with me. And I think acknowledging that is both helpful because it's true for me, but it's also, I believe it to be helpful for others to hear that, because I think they also intuitively know they've taken some degree of risk in bringing that feedback to me.
And what have you noticed that does for you? Like, tell me about that. Tell me about the difference for you, kind of internally, when you shift it from like, oh, this is a moment where I need to thank them. Like, what does that allow you to do at that point that you weren't doing before?
Right. Well, I think it slows me down, and it slows me down. It puts me in a position where my own internal sensors are not going off. It allows me to be more receptive. It allows me to listen, to seek to understand another person's point of view as opposed to be understood. And I think what it does is it creates the foundation for an actual dialogue to happen where something better might come out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate this example. And I know we're honing in on the gratitude things, but I think what Josh has done here is he's gotten really acute in what he knows. When I do this thing, when I make visible this thing, when I orally produce this thing, it's actually going to shift me, and it's going to allow me to then demonstrate the behavior I want. We'll talk about consequences in reality in a minute. And that's just where I want to make sure the audience hones in on this. Because Josh could have just said like, oh, I'm going to remind myself to get curious. That's not specific enough. Josh has
Mhm.
actually said, no, I want to change the tenor for myself by being gracious first, but I am going to get curious. But then he gives himself sentence stems. I'm noticing that you interpreted what I said this way. Can we talk about that for a minute? Or I'm wondering something about your point of view, or whatever it is. It's just going to shift Josh. Like even just the smallest amount, it's going to shift Josh because he's more aware of it now. And he says, by showing gratitude, I can get back into the frame of mind I actually want to demonstrate here. Not
Yeah.
not to avoid the conflict. He's not doing this so he can avoid the challenge. It's so he can be more open to it. So
Yeah,
I
no,
love that,
good
Josh.
stuff, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good observations. Yeah, and what I would add to that is when I talked about like the skill gap, right? A skill gap for me has been under pressure, under anxiety, under feeling attacked by others or other people thinking that I'm dumb. I have that's where my emotional reactivity shows up the most, and so I am really good at asking those contaminated questions. What I had to learn, and I still have to learn more effectively, is the skillful uncontaminated question, the language of the I noticed, I'm wondering, I'm curious, I imagine, all of that work is something that is just ongoing. And so I know, like, presenting a model like this and just saying, "Oh, this is what I would do." It simplifies the fact that this is where the real traction has to happen. Is your actions are not just putting it on paper and thinking about it. It's actually, you have to do it again and again. And probably a lot of my practice has been um, in low stakes situations where the pressure's not on, so I can learn the language in general, and then it becomes more available to me under pressure.
Yeah. All right. So Josh, good job. He named that action. Now we're going to see, hopefully Josh is going to say, I mean, and some of this is like pre-work and you're going to start doing it. So you might see different consequences and realities. That's fine. But Josh, what becomes the new consequence of that new action and then the new reality?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things happen is that people are actually able to clarify because, bringing feedback is tough for them too. And so maybe what they shared was a little bit of, maybe a little confusing, maybe a little off the mark from what they wanted. So we get to the point where they feel like they can be clear. It allows me to understand what they're saying. It allows them to continue speaking from their kind of point of view, their side of the road, as opposed to kind of becoming defensive themselves. And it prevents my defensive reactivity from giving them like I'll just let Josh off the hook, right? It keeps us engaged. It keeps the dialogue really connected. And that consequence becomes the last part here, which is a different reality around me and the people in my life where I have important relationships, is that we actually have the reality is we can have helpful conversations. We can have useful conversations where we stay connected and we can actually get to a level of depth where each of us can bring our questions, our concerns, our places that make us really grateful for the other person more authentically. And that truthfully has changed the quality of relationships in my own life. So that's kind of the know yourself to lead yourself cycle. I would love more of your thoughts here, John.
Yeah. First thing I'm going to really recommend to people is I would jump to YouTube to see this. And, I will, hopefully we've also got some shorts where I can kind of have this visual there, but I think seeing it's really great. We'll put this tool I think would be good. And you have to do both of them. One is do it like the more, the tendency and the action, the kind of pattern are going to be the same because that's just going to be there. You're going to continue to have, Josh is probably going to still have this tendency to be defensive. Like that's just kind of ingrained in who he is. Like, and the more important thing is he can recognize, like, now maybe over time, he doesn't have to, his new action is going to be more of the rote immediate thing he does, which is great. He's changed behavior, but it's probably still ingrained to him that he's just going to be a little defensive.
And just a quick note there, John, is when your reality starts to change around you, that tendency doesn't have to show up as often. Right? So the change here is not just in the action. It's not just in the reality. While my tendency is not shifting, if I'm in a reality where people around me, myself included, know that we can engage in meaningful dialogue with criticism being brought from a place of care, my tendency is just it's not going to come up as often because I feel like that person is actually for me and that I can trust them to be bringing their concerns out of a place of care. Well, and so it doesn't spark that tendency as often. So there's a real transformation available here.
But and also to get to the point of why we're not saying like, hey, get rid of that tendency or overhaul it, is the same reason I wouldn't tell someone to change their personality, right? There might be good that comes from Josh's defensiveness. He might be a little bit more willing to stand his ground on principles that he has or beliefs he has and not going to be a pushover versus if he had a tendency of, I often find myself deferring immediately to others and never assert my opinion. That would be a whole different series of actions. So it's okay to have that tendency, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to present it in a healthier way, right? That allows me to get my point across, but really actually helps me to fully hear others now because of this change. So great. I can see how this would be a great exercise for a leader to show like these two different versions for their leaders to be like, notice this first one and how I tend to act. Here's what I'm aiming to do. And then you do that yourself. So no, thanks for this, Judge. I think it's really cool. Thank you for for sharing, vulnerably.
Sure. Yeah.
Your own reflection. I can see myself wanting to do this. And I think what I will add here, if I think this is the right time to do this, is what we talked about, we really named is Josh got really acute. And I might just share my screen here in a minute. But Josh got really acute on a targeted thing that changed in his action, right? I have this tendency. I ask contaminated questions. And I think the biggest thing is Josh got really honed in on, he recognized when and where this happened. And now he says, ooh, when I know I have this tendency, I'm going to jump to gratitude next, because that's the thing for me that's going to change my mindset, right? You have to do that for yourself. But part of that is actually naming a behavior, giving language to it. So the only additional thing I will add here is that, and we'll put this there as well, is that I work for an organization called Behavioral Essentials. And this is all what our work is about behavioral awareness, not just personality tendencies, and how you shift behavior, because behavior is more malleable. It's just like what Josh said. His tendency is under the surface, but it comes out through those defensive words, through that action, through that, kind of a criticality unleashed a little bit. And so what do I have to do to shift that so it becomes a better circumstance for me and for others? So I would just name here, some of this is going to come through when you're starting this journey, is what is a behavioral tendency I have? What strengths come with that, but what challenges does it lead to? So on the screen is a list of like our 21 typical behaviors. Anyone out there that's interested in taking an assessment, let me know. I have access to some assessments. I think there's a lot of good that can come. But I'm going to just do one of these, which is like, and it's a pretty easy one, is order. People can fall on two opposite ends of order. And order is going to be the need for order and structure. You might be highly organized, very particular about how things are done, and you live your life needing to be really structured. Okay. There's the other end where your need is actually to avoid structure and order. You don't like being contained. You don't like feeling like you're that, I don't know, boxed in. Okay. I'm going to start with someone who's high order. Most of us would say that's a pretty good thing. You might notice though, that when change occurs, or when someone else has a way they want to do things, I get very defensive because I have a particular way and I become inflexible. That's my tendency, is to become inflexible. So then you got to do what Josh said, right? And you say, great, how do I allow myself to enter into a situation where I am more flexible and more willing to go with other people's ways of structuring things? It doesn't have to be my way. So I don't want to get too far into that, but I think getting out of like, I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert, and that leads to this series of both strengths and challenges. Take that a step further into, great, well, what's the behavior that sometimes leads to that can be problematic for me? Okay. Because you can be, I'm sorry, I'm being a little long-winded here, but you can be introverted, or let's say extroverted. Let's say you can be extroverted, and I can have two different ways of doing it. One, I'm really good in like big groups and networking sort of situations. And so I love that spot. Or I love to perform. I love to be center stage. I'm the first one to participate in meetings. That's probably awesome. Like people, they feel a magnetism about you. They're drawn to you, but you can also dominate things in a way that's problematic, and you can recognize that. So all I'm getting at is, I think another way to think about this is going to be like really honing in on naming behaviors,
right?
Getting granular like Josh did, and then shifting that. Get out of just like stopping at personality or stopping at tendency.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
Anything that surfaced for you there, Josh, or further thoughts on that?
Well, I'd encourage listeners, what John was showing, there's a list of some common behaviors, and they're not as precise as I talk too much, right? They're kind of categorized under these thoughtful umbrellas, but they do, to me, indicate some common behavioral patterns that many of our listeners might have. So
but what I would say is, if you do this and you look at it, if you say I talk too much, it helps you say, oh, that's because I have high exhibition and I love to be kind of center stage. So I need to do something to recognize that tendency and that need. I've got to find little tweaks to at times hone it in.
Right.
So then,
Right.
So
when I'm presenting to a group, I really love to get all the attention and get a laugh. So my tendency that's the when and where. The tendency is, I just keep going and I keep looking for things to say, and some of it's, BS and some of it's, real.
Yeah.
Well, the behavior I need to change is blank. And so much you could do with this. So I think I don't have a lot more to add other than the goal in today's podcast for our listeners and, from our vantage point is we want you to go from this place of saying, yeah, leadership development, it's great stuff. I'm all for it. And really challenge yourself to say, what am I actually doing about it? Am I choosing to make this a useful practice in my life? Or am I just looking at it as this nice box to check and to kind of show that I'm willing to do self-growth, but not actually doing anything about it? And so I think the value in this tool, and I think it's what I would call is like a power tool. Like it's applicable in your personal life. It's applicable at work. It's simple to understand. It's hard to do it well, is to use it and to start really getting, like, even maybe encouraging you to be accountable to this and say, hey, I listened to this podcast. I'm going to tell my boss about it. I'm going to tell him this is a behavior that I'm going to start working on changing. I want you to let me know how that's going. Can I put this in my development plan? Or you ask your spouse at home. There's so many ways you could use it. But again, if what you think of as your leadership development is simply listening to this podcast, cool. That's okay. But that frankly isn't going to be moving the needle for your own development unless you actually do something about it. And just getting good ideas is not sufficient, in my opinion. So hopefully this gives you more than just a good idea. It gives you a transformational tool that can help you to lead yourself better, but also as a result of that, leading other people better.
Yeah, and Josh and I are a little bit different. I'm not going to say transformational because I don't think any of the work I do is transformational. It's about tweaks and it's about adjustments and it's about just like daily, like it's 1% growth every day, right? So, I don't want anybody to, it can be transformational over time. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying like this will blow up your life overnight. It's incremental growth too, but it means you're growing, you are over time, transforming.
Transform is by like the daily step. It's not for I had one epiphany thought, and then
That's right. That's right. That's a good point to make.
Transfiguration Jesus stuff here. So,
this won't change your life overnight. And anyone who tells you that is probably full of hot air.
But to get granular, I think for this homework, I would really have people look at the tool. And if you need to start with tendency, because like that's your bit, you haven't even thought about what's my tendency, then start there. But I would really encourage, I think a lot of people can name their tendency quick. Get to where Josh got to that action. I would love to see people like sharing with us, well, this was the action. And man, this is the tiny tweak I'm making. For Josh, it was just like, I'm inserting a gratitude statement, something like that. I think that's where real change can happen. So that's where my focus would go to, is I would love to see more people share with us that tiny, tiny, tiny change you made. Of course, if you have to be before that, you have to start with the tendency, start there this week. Notice that tendency. So great stuff. Thanks, Josh, again for your sharing, your vulnerability. I think that brings it to life for people. And we'd love to hear how people use this. So please contact us and let us know. But until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.